All right, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com. And if you're new to this format, basically what we do here is we break this into three parts, generally. The first part, I'm going to go ahead and review what's been happening in the world of solar for the last week or so. And then we're going to go in and we're going to review any upcoming conferences, any webinars. Just as a spoiler alert, there aren't that many happening at this time of year. Sometimes we're just inundated with a whole bunch, but it's pretty sparse pickings at the moment. And then we go into a deep dive on a subject that I find of interest within the solar industry. And we're joined by a number of people around the world, really, who are on this chat here, and hopefully we'll get them to join in and give their 2 cents. It's really an opportunity for those of us who find the world of solar just amazing to kind of geek out about solar for a brief period of time. Now, today's subject matter, I have been thinking for a while. We see that the cost of wind and solar and battery storage has been coming down pretty dramatically over the last number of years. And so you would assume that the cost of electricity, because that wind and solar are becoming a bigger and bigger part, would also be coming down. But we're seeing the opposite happen. So I wanted to look at that and say, if the cost of generation is coming down, why is the cost of electricity going up? So that's the basic premise there. So that's the deep dive that we'll take a look at. But let's go ahead and jump into the what's happening in the world of solar for the week of January 11th. 2026. I won't say, can you believe it's 2026 already? That's a hackneyed expression. Anyway, so Alphabet, Google's parent company, announced last month that it'll be acquire clean energy and data center infrastructure developer Intersect for $4.75 billion in a deal that's expected to close in the first half of this year. The portfolio Alphabet will acquire includes projects that are already under construction in Texas and in California. The acquisition represents a new approach for Alphabet. In the past, the company had pretty much relied on independent power producers and utilities to create the generation for their data centers that are being built. This acquisition indicates that Google plans to now own, construct, and manage many of its own clean energy power plants. And speaking of data centers, they are driving up rapidly. The increase in the number and capacity of large load interconnection requests within the ERCOT territory, that's the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, according to a December report from that grid operator. Grid planners in Texas are assessing more than 233 gigawatts of large load interconnection requests. More than 70% of those are coming from data centers. The total capacity exploring grid interconnection near the end of 2025 increased 300% over the amount for the same time period a year earlier. The large increase in load requests is taxing the regulator and leading to long delays. ERCOT rules were developed to consider about 40 to 50 large load requests at a time. And according to this report, they've received about 250 of these load requests and about 2,000 new generation interconnection requests in 2025. 77% of the new generation interconnection requests were for solar and storage projects. As federal policy has swung away from promoting renewable energy and in favor of fossil fuel projects, many states have announced plans to continue to maintain the momentum towards the clean energy transition. Virginia Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger and fellow Democrats within that state outlined their energy agenda last month and emphasizing the need to lower electric costs, kind of Captain Obvious there. Spanberger, who is slated to be sworn in on January 7th, made energy affordability and clean energy a key part of her campaign. Key to this legislation is increasing utility energy storage requirements and removing regulatory hurdles for new wind and solar projects. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy recently signed Its law focused on smart solar permitting. The bill will expedite the approval process for residential solar and battery systems, and the legislation will require state regulators to make an online automated permitting platform for rooftop solar and battery installs available statewide within 18 months of the bill's signing. Brown University Climate Solutions Lab estimates that adopting this permitting system statewide could result in an additional 200,000 residential solar systems installed within the state by 2040. And Governor J.B. Pritzker, and I didn't write down which state, I think he's with Illinois, pretty sure on that, earlier this month signed the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act. The CRGA Act includes requirements to add 3 gigawatts of battery storage to the grid, increase consumer access to home efficiency rebates, increase funds for low-income energy efficiency programs, adopt grid-enhancing technologies, and reduce bottlenecks in the process to develop and improve transmission lines. So a lot of activity happening at the state level. Another state that's in the news here, a study evaluating Kentucky's electricity needs, shows that the new state laws that are hindering the transition to cheaper, cleaner, and more dependable energy grid. The study compares multiple energy pathways through 2050 and concludes that replacing aging coal-fired power plants with a mix of renewable energy, battery storage, and efficiencies could save Kentuckians billions while maintaining grid reliability. The study also analyzes the impacts of Kentucky Senate Bill 4 and Senate Bill 349. Now, these are state laws that make it harder to retire aging coal-fired power plants and replace them with energy generating capacity from renewables. The study finds that these laws are inhibiting the development of alternatives and causing further challenges in dependability and affordability of electric generation for utilities within Kentucky. The study further demonstrated that a more modern and diverse energy portfolio would strengthen resilience during periods of extreme heat and extreme cold when older fossil fuel systems are prone to fail. The least cost option for the Kentucky energy future, according to this report, is transitions away from coal generation and does not include building new gas-fired power plants. It concludes that transitioning to wind and solar will save customers about $2.6 billion through 2050. And plug-in solar, we've had presentations about that in the past, also known as balcony solar. It's a popular option in Europe, and it's now starting to catch on within the United States. More than 1 million such units were installed in Germany, just as an example. Last year, Utah became the first state to allow systems up to 1.2 kilowatts plug-in solar. That's basically like 3 solar panels to be installed without utility approval. Earlier this month, Senate Bill 868 was introduced in the California Senate, designed to eliminate red tape and set statewide safety standards for portable solar systems. Lawmakers in Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire are also looking at laws to permit these systems. And Underwriters Labs has jumped into this, unveiling a new testing program for plug-in solar systems. The program is based on UL 3700, defines the safety criteria for interactive plug-in PV equipment. If you're not familiar with the plug-in systems, basically what it is it's a system that really requires no installation. It's a modular type thing, 3 panels, some microinverters, perhaps battery, perhaps not. But you basically just plug them into an outlet. That's the whole installation there. Now, these new UL standards, they include construction, performance, and labeling standards tailored to plug-in solar systems. These hopefully will offer manufacturers of these systems a reliable foundation for designing their products that consistently meet safety and performance requirements. The real market for this they're looking at are renters, for facilities like condos that do not have a roof, or just people who don't want to make that investment. They're thinking they're short term. These systems can be moved with you. So they do offer a portion of the public an option to supplement some of their electric bill without an investment, large investment. And that's the news according to what I've found. Anybody have anything else they would like to add to this, or any comments from what's happening in the headlines? Chris, I see your
I was
hands up.
talking to my friend in Canada yesterday, and British Columbia Power is actively pursuing and working with contractors to install those solars that you were just talking about.
Oh, okay.
He's already signed a contract with BC Power, and they're actively pushing as many people to get on, and they're made it easier for them to do it. So that's very encouraging.
Yep, it's just one more. We've talked about here about going from a large profit margin, low volume industry to moving towards a large volume, low margin industry, and maybe this is one step in that direction. It's not going to be for everyone, but it's an option. Eric, I see your hand is raised. You got, yep, I see your hand disappeared there, so maybe no comment there. Anybody else have anything they'd like to add here before I move on to the items coming up, the webinars? Yeah, Al?
Jay, I didn't get the mute off in time.
Okay, go ahead.
Hey, sorry, I'm a little bit late. Did you guys talk about the AEP thing?
AEP, no, I didn't mention AEP. Is there news from AEP?
I just saw an article the other day that AEP is trying to go and, I don't want to say it wrong. I just kind of briefly read it. It looked like they're proposing to change the standards on residential solar. So like pay less, charge more of a larger fee. And then they wanted to reduce tax credit, all kinds of stuff. It just kind of seemed like a slap in the face of renewable energy.
Uh-huh. I didn't see that article specifically, but that wouldn't surprise me because that's basically the playbook that the utilities are following in response to the fact that more and more people are putting rooftop solar on. There's that old line given to Gandhi, but apparently he didn't say it, where first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they attack you, and then you win. So we're in full on attack mode because the utilities are basically saying, okay, solar's fine as long as we own it. We don't want anybody else to own it. So you begin to put barriers in folks' way to hooking up solar. To be fair to the utilities, they're not really in the business of paying retail for people to sell back power to them. So I could say, yeah, okay, fair enough. You want to reduce the amount of compensation, you want to make it more difficult. Another thing, and I think we'll touch on this in our deep dive, is the utilities are trying to hide some of the charges. They get political pushback when you see the cost of electricity going up and up and up. But if you change the billing structures, if you change the way everything is measured, you can increase your billing without, having it easily reported upon where prices went up 18% or whatever. No, they didn't go up 18%. We just changed the way we structure the billing. And yeah, the net effect is they went up 18%, but we can actually claim that they went down or whatever. So Al, you had a comment there?
Yeah, the plug-in solar or the balcony solar it's such a small amount. Does it even flow to the grid if there's excess? I would assume at some point there might be excess that would, and I don't know how that would work. And then the other thing is, if the power is down, will these systems work? And if they do, isn't that a threat to somebody working on the lines?
Yeah, and the way I've read into it, many of these systems, probably most of these systems, do not have any kind of battery backup. So if the grid goes down, they're just down. They're essentially microinverters hooked up to small, to panels. So they would have anti-islanding that would cut
So
them
they would
off.
shut off. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I would guess 95% of the time or better, it will not backfeed to the grid because, like you say, it's such a small amount. And you're only talking about daytime when the power is being generated. So it probably just offsets a little bit. But if it does backfeed to the grid, then you probably fall into that net metering world. Obviously, if the utility doesn't have to approve it, they're at least going to be aware of it if you're backfeeding the grid. But there are some that have battery systems and they would follow the same. You'd have to have some sort of way, I would think. It seems to me what they do is they have an outlet in the unit itself. And so you basically would have just one live outlet. It would not feed when the grid goes down. You would have a place where you could plug in and use that solar. It's very cumbersome. It's not, it's going to be, it's a cumbersome process. I think it's really just meant to offset a little bit of your electricity. Doug, you had a comment there?
Yeah, something for people to consider, particularly some of the organizations. So this is with respect to AEP. There's more than one way to skin a cat. I learned that in high school physiology. Think about that a minute. Anyway, there are these various associations, and I'm not knocking what they're doing, but AEP is a publicly traded company. So imagine if you had a bunch of solar people who are getting, if they're on a line, I mean, if they're recovering reasonable costs, that's not a problem. But if they're being obnoxious, if the members of the society, if the members of the solar community, not as the group, but individuals, bought a few shares of stock, and then all of them coordinatedly wrote and said, we want this brought up at the stockholders meeting. And now you've got 100 or 200 or 300 stockholders complaining and petitioning. That might also get their attention and just make it worthwhile enough to straighten up and act right. So there's another strategy here that could be talked about and maybe implemented, just for what it's worth.
Yep. Well, I think I think some of these comments are feeding right into what our discussion is going to be here in just a couple of minutes. And this is good. I'd like to have a lot more feedback when we get into that. So let me jump through the upcoming events, and then we'll go ahead and jump right into the trashing of our utility companies. And they're the kind of company everybody loves to hate. Any regulated company is quite, they're this big bureaucratic behemoth, and you feel like you have no say in the process. So anyway, let's jump into the announcements of what's coming up. We've got a face-to-face conference in Orlando, January 19th through the 22nd, the Clean Fuels Conference. If you're in the Orlando area, that's there. And then Power Gen, San Antonio, Texas, January 20th through the 22nd. And now we're starting to get some of these free webinars that are showing up in my feed anyway. January 26th, Grid Resilience. That's being put on by Factor This, which is a nice podcast if you're interested in that. That's going to be at noon Eastern Time, January 26th. And then there's Solar United Neighbors having a solar coffee chat. That's on the 28th at 2 p.m. And then, of course, our shameless advertisement here about solarpvtraining.com. We have face-to-face, we have online. We've just updated our online residential design and installation course, so I would invite you to go in and take a look at that. Got a couple of video previews about that in our textbook. So if you want to get a sense of that, just visit our website. And that's pretty much everything that showed up. Does anyone have any event that they'd like to add into that mix there? I'll give you just a second to chime in. All right, so now let the trashing begin. So as I said, the deep dive that I wanted to discuss here was really if the cost of generation of electricity is going down, and that's one of the premises, if you've been a regular attendee of these sessions, I think we could argue that certainly the cost of electricity from wind and solar and battery storage has been declining and declining pretty rapidly. And we've also seen that the vast majority of new generation being added to the grid is wind and solar and battery storage. Now obviously there's a latency issue there. There's a lot of embedded base that needs to be displaced over time. And we'll touch on that briefly here. But if that's the case, if the cost of generation is coming down, how come the cost of electricity is increasing and increasing at a fair rate? So, and just as a reminder that these sessions here are approved by ETA International, the Electronic Technicians Association International, for 30 minutes of CEUs for their certification program, specifically the solar PV level 1, PV level 2. And if you're certified in some of the others, like the electronics, it might count for that as well. So take a look at it. You can access a certificate of completion at our website, Solar PV Training. Just go into the tab under online courses. There's Solar Noon Tuesday. You'll see a list. In fact, we have about 4 years of recorded sessions like this that are available there if you want to peruse through some of the pearls of wisdom that have been spouted off over the years, and also on our YouTube channel. So that's where we're at. So, all right, let's talk about your utility bill. And I thought maybe to back up, because the first thing we want to look at is really the basic utility bill, what we're being charged for here. And this is why it gets complicated, because I've had discussions with utilities in the past where I say, you're charging me this particular rate for my electricity. And they go, no, we're not. We only charge you 12 cents a kilowatt hour or whatever. And I say, no, you know what? I've got this really complicated way of figuring out how much you're charging me. I take my utility bill and I divide it by the amount of electricity I'm using, and that's the rate you're charging me. I don't care how you want to slice it and dice it and julienne fry it. That's the cost. And so they're trying to hide it. AEP does a pretty good job. They're pretty upfront with at least their residential bills, and we're really just focusing on residential. So I took an example here. This is a current bill from our office, and you can see with the solar in the summer months, we don't use very much electricity. Winter, you use a bit. And so what is the cost? What is the cost of electricity? Now, I would argue, just looking at this bill, I'll pull out my handy calculator here. The cost was $166. We divide that by 836 kilowatt hours, and the result is 19.85 cents per kilowatt hour. So I would say to AEP here, you're charging me about 20 cents a kilowatt hour. That's as simple as it gets. Yet they're going to break it into a few different areas. And as I said, AEP here in their billing is pretty straightforward. Generation, that's your supply. They're saying that's how much we charge you to generate the electricity. And that's $81.93. So somebody might say, well, the cost of your electricity was $81.93 divided by, I've already forgotten how much we used there. It was 836 kilowatt hours. So 836, and that's going to get us 9.8 cents. So somebody might say, okay, the cost of generating your electricity, 9.8 cents. Now the utility itself pays a fee for that money or for that electricity. And their charge is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of, let's say, 4 cents a kilowatt hour. It's going to vary depending on time of day that it's being generated. But so in the old days, about 50% of what they were charging you. Fair enough. Wholesale 50% of what retail is. But then you tack on transmission and distribution charges. Well, what is the difference between transmission and distribution? Basically, transmission is taking the power from the power plant and bringing it to the local distribution hub. That's usually going to be a one of these substations that you see scattered around the city, those big high fenced in areas with all the transformers and the like. Okay, and then the distribution charge is going to be the cost of bringing that power from those substations to your home or to your business. So that's what they're charging. So they've broken it into 3 different levels. And then there's a customer charge or access charge. They'll call it different things. In this case, it's just for the pleasure of connecting up to AEP. They're going to charge you $10 a month, whether you do anything, whether you use any power or not. This is a regulated telco, an investor-owned utility, an IOU. So that all these charges are based on whatever the Public Service Commission allows them to charge. And in total, that's what they're going to charge you. So you can see that it has the generation charges and the distribution transmission charges. And the utility itself, we hear sometimes that our utilities are deregulated, but for the most part, the deregulation is only going to be in the generation. You can select who you want to generate your service, generate the electrons that you're going to be using, but you're kind of stuck with your distribution, whoever the utility is that's servicing your region. And I'm not really 100% sure on this, but I don't know how often you can choose your transmission service. My guess is that's not an option usually either. So that's basically how you're going to be reading your electric bill. So now some other utilities, if you start getting into it, well, boy, it can get complicated. They've got, renewable energy charges. They try and make it look like the cost of renewable energy is adding to the cost of your bill. And so a lot of people think that renewable energy must be more expensive and it's adding these costs, and it's all these tree huggers who are making me have to pay more for my electric. But oftentimes those are just going to be penalties for them not meeting their portfolio targets from the various states. They might be charging you for lawsuits that have been brought against them because, they were doing something wrong, or they'll add on a fee to pay for the Spanish-American War, or whatever it is they decide. These things get complicated and almost incomprehensible. And then when you start getting into demand charges and they want to charge you based on the 15-minute interval that is where you use the most power, that's more for commercial. Or you can get time of day pricing where, depending on when you're using it, it gets, lower or more expensive. So these bills can get super, super complicated. So that's why I like the AEP example. That's kind of best case scenario. That's as simple as it gets at the moment. So what are we seeing as far as utility prices? Well, you can see from this chart here, we're seeing an upward trend. And that upward trend is pretty dramatic. If you really look at it closely, I don't have a zoom in on this, but you can see that there was an upward trend pretty strong up until about the year 2000 or so. And then, this doesn't go back that far. But yeah, Eric, you've got a comment there?
Yeah, I just find it how the winds change really quickly. Like a year ago, 2 years ago, everybody was bashing Bitcoin because how much energy it uses, and it's using this dirty fossil fuel electricity. Now we got data centers for AI, and everybody's okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what they're going to do, I mean, everybody looks for a simple cause for these things. And I must admit, when I started researching this for this presentation here, I'm certainly willing to look at utilities as the villain. I want to find some clean, easy answer where these guys are basically, screwing their customers, and it's just as simple as that. I will tell you that I'm coming away a bit more agnostic. not willing to give them a pass, but also willing to say that there are factors here that are contributing. So, hopefully maybe you'll come to the same conclusion, or maybe you'll think I'm giving them too much. But we're definitely seeing that electricity prices are rising. I saw somebody mention their cost has gone up 40%. I don't know what that time period was, but we will see that that's not atypical. Now, the variations are very, very different by state. So if you look at this map here of the US, well, the darker the color, the faster the rate increase. So you start looking out there, at the West Coast, West Virginia, Kentucky, Wisconsin. Some of those are pretty dark. And then the rates are quite different. You can see all the way at California with 30 some cents a kilowatt hour, down to like Louisiana with 11 and a half cents a kilowatt hour. Now, these are 2024 prices. Prices have gone up a bit there. So I didn't want to reference the price per se. From this map, from this diagram, it really is just showing you where are these rates increasing and increasing pretty quickly. When we do look at what are some of the actual rates in 2025, Hawaii, far and away the most expensive electricity. And as you would imagine, far and away the place with the largest solar adoption. You've got sunlight, you've got high electricity. So you can offset that with rooftop solar pretty economically. California, same kind of situation. Then you start seeing some of these high cost places like Massachusetts, Maine. When you look at the time period from 2020 through 2025, we've seen that we've had about a cumulative inflation rate of around 25%. So over that 5 to 6 year period, when you compound the effects of inflation, over that time period, general prices have increased about 25%. Cost of electricity averaged over the entire United States up about 30%. So here, if I'm a utility, and I'm trying to justify my existence, I would say, hey, you know what? That's not terrible. We're facing a lot of headwinds. Okay, we've exceeded the rate of inflation a little bit, but not dramatically, not something to get all sorts of crazy about. So now if you live in Hawaii or California, where you've seen a 90, 100%, 150% increase in electric rates, yeah. But if you live in some place like Louisiana where you've seen almost no increase, it's not going to be a big deal. So I'm just saying the pain has not been spread evenly, but average, not hugely out of hand, as far as that. I frankly expected it to be more dramatic than that on average. But of course, as Mark Twain always said, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. You can make this stuff say whatever it is you want to say. So, all right, we got another. Oh yeah, Kevin, or is it Kelvin? Kelvin, you've got a question? You're muted there. If you could unmute yourself, that would be helpful. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. I just see something contradictory. As I know, California and the West Coast was the state who have more initiative in solar panel and clean energy. So how is that electricity cost for the power energy for the power companies are more expensive than all the different states? It's not that California started with the solar panel long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
I just question. I don't know. I just see it contradictory.
Yeah, I would say, and trying to read into it, I guess it just brings up how complicated all of this is. California definitely is a state where there was early and large adoption of solar. Washington and Oregon, not so much. That's pretty much hydropower up there. So the rate of increase has to be pretty much utility driven. It may have been because there were droughts during this period of time. So hydropower gets more expensive. But remember that rooftop solar is a tiny sliver of the whole solar market. So even though we're seeing a dramatic adoption of rooftop solar in states like California, it's really going to be what is happening at the utility solar level. And even though they're transitioning from natural gas and coal for the most part to wind and solar and now battery storage, that may not result in cost savings to the customer. And that was sort of what led me to my original question. Why not? Why is it not resulting in cost savings? And I think, well, California, one thing they would probably point to is the extensive wildfires and the capital improvements that had to be the response to that. So yeah, okay, we're generation is fine, but we're getting a lot of problems here. We're getting lawsuits. We're having to rebuild our infrastructure. There's a lot of costs there. And I guess what I wanted to look at is, are they blowing smoke up our skirt, or is that real? You know, is that legitimate? And as I sort of said a minute ago, coming away, I still don't quite know, but I'm less inclined to think it's all just BS. I think they have some real costs. So who knows?
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
good.
you.
Sure. All right. So what new power? Like, part of our premise here is we're obviously adding power to the grid. Well, what power are we adding to the grid? Well, this is a bit of a review here for those of us who have been on these sessions, but we can see from 2000 to 2025, this comes from EIA, the Electrical Information Administration. Is that the right thing? Anyway, it's the government. So if you look back to 2000, really 2000 through 2005, the new additions to the grid were pretty much all natural gas. Natural gas was the dominant player there. Everything coming on board was natural gas. Prior to that, it was kind of all coal. And then you start to see, okay, there's a little bit of wind. Wind in 2005 starts to pick up, but that's just, all right, the wind picked up. All right, so then we move towards 2010. We see wind becomes really a dominant player. In fact, in 2009, it's about 50%. We do see a little bit more solar begins, slightly in that, but not really recognizable. There is a little bit of last gasp of coal in that time period. But then really starting around 2012, which is, I would argue, sort of the age of renewable energy. That's when the age of renewable energy begins. That's when the cost of solar becomes cheaper than the continuing to just simply pay your utility bill over a 25-year period. So we're starting to see the growth of utility scale solar. And that bottom, the dark blue there, that's solar. And it continues to progress. It's starting to, natural gas, wind, and solar are the three main players during that period. Coal goes away as an option. I mean, the coal industry is dead as it comes to that. It's just too expensive versus the alternatives. Nuclear died a long time before that, and we keep hearing the tech bros talk about it, but it's just not cost competitive. So it really is a battle between wind, solar, and natural gas. And the argument against wind and solar, yeah, it's cheaper, but the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. But natural gas, stored sunlight, right? It's always available. It's 100% always dispatchable. Well, that's the reality up until about 2020. And then we start seeing the advent of battery storage, because, yeah, the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. But if you store it in a battery, now you got power available. So that's the answer to that intermittency issue. And then you start getting all the way up into 2025, 2024. Really, 90% of everything being added to the grid is wind, solar, and battery storage. That's where, look at what they're doing, not what they're saying. This time period is now natural gas is being phased out. Now there's a bit of a renaissance coming in, not next year, or this year, I should say, but maybe the year after, because of the incentives from the government. We might see natural gas get a little bit more play, but new incentives are going to be, there's going to be a lag. So in 2026, it's still going to be wind, solar, and battery storage, at least 90%. Okay, and if you look at the prices for those technologies, they're going down. They're going down dramatically. So I just wanted to sort of put this in here because that was one of the premises of the argument here. This is in fact the case. We're adding wind, solar, and battery and wind and solar are coming down in price. We should see an impact on prices. And when we look at this year, these are the projections, really. We're looking at solar being 50% of all new energy added to the US grid, batteries being about 30%. That's pretty dramatic. And I used to think, is batteries really a generation? Isn't it just storage of something else that's already being generated? But then you could make the same argument about natural gas. You could make the same argument about coal. That's just energy that's been stored over a long period of time, but it's really just sunlight that's been stored. So yeah, if we're going to call coal an energy source, we should call batteries an energy source as well. It's just that it's on a much more compressed time scale. And then we look at 12% wind and 8% natural gas, and then 0.2% other stuff. Who knows what that is? Petroleum, biofuels, whatever. Maybe a little bit of hydro. All right. So that's where we're at. Okay. So why are the prices going up? Well, this is what the utilities are claiming. So the reason why the prices are going up, we're dealing with an aging infrastructure that has need for upgrades in distribution and transmission. So all of those wires, all that infrastructure that's taking it from point of generation to point of consumption, it's getting old and it's got to be upgraded. And there's a lot of investment there. Now, you could argue if you just put solar on your rooftop, you don't need any of that. And from the utility standpoint, they should be encouraging that, because if they really do have an infrastructure that's hanging on by a thread, taking some of the load demand off of it by encouraging rooftop solar should be a strategy to help extend the life of an aging infrastructure. You could make that argument. Yep, Eric, you got a comment?
Yeah. So I last year before, well, actually, year before, I was looking into, how can you turn, installing into a business, and I was working with the Bright folks, and I had a nice guy who kind of gave me the rundown on how the power companies make money, and frankly, they say they make money on top of all new construction.
Yeah.
So, and the more the project costs, the more money they make. So that's why they don't really want to do the lowest cost. They want to do the most expensive ones because they make the most profit on that. But also, if we want to go and look at the parallel to telecom, right? If you get to a point where they're no longer doing generation, there's not a whole lot of money in the routing of electrons, kind of like what the phone companies got, So I think that's probably why they still want to be in generation too,
Yeah. Yep. I fair point. All right. So we'll talk. I'll hit some of these a little more in depth, but I wanted to touch on what their argument is. There's the rising cost of fuel. They're saying, look at it. The cost of natural gas is going through the roof. We're still dependent, large measure, on natural gas and coal. And as those costs go up, it just adds to the volatility of your electric bill. That's an argument. Surge in demand. We've been hearing a lot about this. We've been hearing about AI. We heard it about Bitcoin, as Eric pointed out earlier. There's always going to be some reason. I've had sessions. I love to be a catastrophist about how this upcoming surge over the next several years is going to impact us dramatically. So let's take a look at that. Extreme weather events. We've seen, of course, hurricanes. We've seen fires. We've seen freezing events in Texas. All of these things add to the cost in repairs, but also in hardening your infrastructure to meet those. They love to throw in the cost of renewables. You'll hear this often, that it's your neighbor who is leeching off of the grid that's increasing the cost of your electricity. It's the high cost of renewables that's adding to it. I think we can put that into a cubby hole that just has a big BS on it. That's just people trying to use culture wars to justify what they were going to do. That one is just nonsense. We've already pointed out the least cost option is wind and solar and battery storage. Battery storage, I wouldn't say least cost, but it's integrated in. Yeah, it's becoming a less and less cost. And then general inflation. When costs go up 25%, fair to say that the cost of electricity will probably go up 25%. So those are some of their arguments. So one of the trends that we've seen, and I thought this diagram here was kind of interesting, is you're seeing that from the utilities standpoint, and I didn't have any more recent numbers, but I suspect the trend continues. They're spending more on delivery and less on production, which makes sense. It follows what the sort of premise of this argument is. If the cost of generation is cheaper, then the cost of power production should be cheaper, but it's being offset by increased delivery costs. If you look at the actual numbers here, when adjusted for inflation, utilities spent 2.6 cents per kilowatt hour in 2010 on delivery, and today they're spending 4.3 cents, which is 65% increase over that time period. Conversely, utility production of the power itself decreased from 6.8 cents in 2010 down to 4.6 cents in 2020. So those kind of bear out. Now, I guess the question is, why is that delivery cost coming up so dramatically? Yeah, Eric? Whoop.
That was my question. Is it because of infrastructure upgrades and, replacing stuff, or?
Well, I don't know. We'll find out. So, yeah. So the other thing is, which I was a little bit surprised. One of the arguments that they're saying is, look at the surging demand. Well, if you look at the surging demand, what's surging demand? At least so far, we're looking at, it's up from the 2005 to 2020. We saw almost no load demand growth at all. But prior to that, for the years prior, they should have had some experience dealing with about a 2% annualized increase in load demand. We just happened to experience a 15-year period of where any load growth was offset through efficiencies and transition to electronics and lower wattage appliances and the like. Okay, now we're back into what was kind of historically, since post-World War II, the norm of around a 2% growth. So this is not unusual. This is not an unusual load growth. Now, I would argue that starting in 2026, it's going to be crazy. And that's going to affect future. But up to this point, I think the load demand growth, that's a red herring. It's something that people will easily buy, but they have not been experiencing it to this point. It does not justify the 30% increase in power prices over the last 5 years. Maybe it justifies it in the next 5 years, but it doesn't justify the past. At least that would be my contention there. And they've done a pretty good job of keeping up with it as far as nameplate capacity. They've been building stuff. And this chart here just sort of shows you that wind and solar are taking on some of that capacity growth. We're seeing that natural gas is holding pretty steady. Hydro's holding pretty steady. Coal is going down. So wind and solar is more than offsetting that. So those are kind of what we're dealing with there. But the nameplate capacity seems to be growing at a rate comparable to the load demand capacity, at least to this point. So if that's the case, I would say that the effect on price should be relatively negligible. So I would sort of say that's at least to this stage, not a good argument from their standpoint. Now, the utility investment has indeed increased. If we look at here, how much that they've been spending on all of the infrastructure, well, if you just take from 2020 to 2025, you'll hear the utilities say, hey, a 56% increase in investment from what we were investing 5 years ago to what we're investing today. Well, that sounds very impressive. But if you look at it as a percentage of their revenue, it's still an increase, but it's not as impressive. In 2020, they spent approximately 29% of their income on capital expenditures. And in 2025, they spent 38% on capital expenditures. Now, the assumption is that these capital expenditures are going to be primarily on distribution and transmission. I would assume. I mean, there's some generation in there, but they're saying that's their big problem. So I would hope they're spending some money on that. But we're really only seeing about a 9% net increase in their investment as a percentage of their revenues. So still legit, still they're spending more. Now the question, and I think Eric raised this issue, are we getting value for money? Is this money that is being invested generating returns? Well, one thing that I find just amazing is if we look at high-speed transmission, I mean, look at how many miles of high-speed transmission lines have been constructed in recent years. I mean, if transmission is a big issue, and literally the Biden administration, as part of the Infrastructure Act, was putting billions and billions of dollars into high-speed transmission. Well, 2013, we saw about 4,000 miles of high-speed transmission lines constructed that year. And then you get into 2023, where we did 55 miles nationwide of high-speed transmission. I mean, basically zero. And 2024, a little bit better, but not great. Not even, what does that amount to? Maybe 300 miles as opposed to 4,000 miles. If this is a huge issue, they're not addressing it. They're not addressing it at all. And I don't care how much money they plowed into it. The results simply are not there. So why aren't the results there? Well, again, Eric sort of hinted at this a little bit. So where do utilities make their money? Well, basically, this chart, I don't know if it tells you a whole lot, but their operating costs are going to be about 50%. And then they depreciate out some of their capital expenditures. They have some debt costs. But basically, their return on equity, that's the bottom area, think of it as profit. The way it works is these are regulated companies. And in theory, they go hat in hand to the Public Utility Commission, and they say, I want a rate increase. And they say, okay, well, for your operating expenditures, you can charge your customers whatever it costs you. For your capital expenditures, you can charge them whatever it is you spent plus a profit. So what that does is incentivizes them to build stuff. It incentivizes them to spend money on capital expenditures. It does not incentivize them on spending it wisely. It really is just the more money you spend, the more money you make. So if you want to spend $1 million on a power plant, you're going to make more money than if you spend $500,000, even if you get the same power plant at the end of it. So it does not encourage efficiency. It does not encourage a lot of things that we would think that they would be looking at. It really is just spend lots of money and you're going to make lots of money. So that's really where we're at there. Now, the cost of natural gas. I love this. This really gets into that Mark Twain, lies, damn lies, and statistics. Look at this graph here. And this is an article that was in one of the utilities, look at this. Natural gas prices hit all-time 14-year high. and just look at that price spike. And this justifies a lot of price increases for electricity, unless you happen to pull back and see that that's a very selected slice. Really, natural gas prices are kind of low historically. I mean, way back in 2006, they got up to $15 per million BTU. Now they're hovering somewhere below $5. So, how can you justify that the cost of electricity is surging because of surging natural gas prices when looking at this timeline from 1996 on, you're kind of not far, you're a little below average on natural gas prices. So I would put that as a non-justifiable reason for these rate increases. Extreme weather events, well, yeah, the price of climate catastrophes is going up pretty dramatically. I don't know if my guess is that's because we're seeing them more frequently and more extreme. It might just be that, recovering from them is getting more and more expensive. But you can see the trend line definitely up from 1990 when it was around, $5 billion in all the way, then it's 4 times as much in more recent time periods. And this is kind of one of these things I threw in just to rag on utilities. But this is where you get into the compensation, because this is part of the operating expense. Now, the public utilities are saying, hey, we're perfectly fine with this. If you look at compensation, like Pacific Gas and Electric, the CEO's compensation increased 500% from 2014 to 2021. Boy, he must be doing a great job. He went from $11.5 million a year, which seems pretty well compensated to me, up to $51.2 million a year in compensation for Pacific Gas. Now, obviously, others going up, but I mean, doubling, tripling. That one, Consolidated Edison, he's slumming it there. He only gets $10 million. So, but this Pacific Gas and Electric, 500% increase in compensation during the same time period. Rates went up 90%. Really? So I don't know if that's justified. Okay, so that's kind of where I ended up at. We're coming to the end of our hour. I would just say that my summary, if I wanted to summarize where I came down on this, is prices are going up, but not dramatically out of line with inflation. I feel like we ain't seen nothing yet. We're heading into the time of volatility. Natural gas, not an excuse. The way that they are compensated, the way the regulatory process works, it incentivizes them to spend a lot of money inefficiently, and that has increased the amount that they're having to invest. They actually, if they lose money, well, the ratepayers are going to bail them out. The Public Utility Commission says, yeah, you know what? You can charge what you have to charge. You just want to justify it. And the more you spend, the more you make. So we're going to just see this escalating price because of that, as long as you keep it so it's not crazy out of line, which seems to be what they're doing. And oh, by the way, you're going to be very well compensated. So that's kind of where I came down to. It's primarily that the system disincentivizes any form of efficiency and incentivizes inefficiency. And as long as we have a system like that, we're going to see steady increases, probably a little bit ahead of inflation. Anybody have any comment they'd like to add to that before we call it quits here today?
I would add one thing, Jay.
Sure.
There is less appetite for regulation from state to state, partly because of the political environment that we're in. And there is less aptitude among political office holders to actually understand what these utility companies are doing. The utility companies are run by smart people, good engineers, they're financially brilliant, but that doesn't make them good actors. It simply makes them more able to take advantage of a situation, and they're taking advantage of it. There's also a movement, and I think this has taken place in some of the New York regions where these companies have gone public, which makes them more driving toward profit as opposed to any kind of service or fairness. So I had a whole list of notes that I was going to throw at you, but you covered the rest of them. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, great. I think that's a good place to end this. And I appreciate everybody's attention, and we'll see you again next week. All right. Take care.